Peters asked Trump's USPS board pick whether to privatize the Postal Service. The nominee said he had no view. He had not reviewed the question. The other nominee said no. Peters held the contrast on the record. Let's watch.
Mr. Chairman, this is for Mr. Galeo and Brodsky, to both of you. Do you support, we'll start with Mr. Brodsky first, do you support privatizing the mail and package delivery operations of the Postal Service? It's just a yes or no answer. I put it closer to your mouth, please.
Yeah, I don't really have a view on whether or not privatizing it would make any sense or not. I'd be happy to listen to.
You have no view of that at this point?
I've heard people talk about it, but I really have not reviewed that as a possibility.
Okay. So it has been a major issue for a long time, but you, even though you're appointed for the, or being nominated for this, you've not thought about it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Gallo?
I am not for privatizing the post office. I think it's fixable.
Right, so you're opposed to privatizing?
Would you say so?
Did you say you're opposed to privatizing?
No, I would not privatize the post office.
You would not?
No.
Okay, I just want to be clear. So that's a no for you. Mr. Brodsky, I represent a very diverse state, including many very rural communities. And the Postal Service is a lifeline for those communities, without question, vital goods, prescriptions, all the things that happen. And most folks believe that privatizing basically means we'll have it very difficult for our rural communities to get the kind of service they're getting right now. So do you think those consequences are unacceptable, that if rural folks are hurt as a result of privatization, that you would think that is probably as a strong argument against privatizing?
Yeah, I would. Look, there's other reasons why privatizing may be difficult too. I mean, just look at the financial condition of the Postal Service with all the unfunded retiree benefits. You know, it's a huge amount of money. You'd have to pay somebody to take it. And I don't think that's necessarily practical. And I think you also lose control over this organization. Somebody who's running it as a private enterprise would look to cut unprofitable routes. And clearly,
that would be rural routes.
We have to, as Vice Chairman Taub said at the Postal Regulatory Commission this past couple weeks ago, June 4th, that we have to get together and talk about what the universal service obligation is and what it should be.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that line. Question to both of you, too. Do you believe that the Postal Service, so we'll start with you, Mr. Gallo, we'll go, if you start back and forth here. Does the Postal Service have the authority to refuse to mail absentee ballots that are sent to voters by election officials?
No.
No.
I agree, no.
Pardon me?
No.
No, okay, good. Mr. Woodruff, Congress established the Merit Systems Protection Board as part of the same 1978 law to ensure that the president and political leaders in the executive branch cannot fire or punish federal employees for political, arbitrary, or personal reasons. In your view, is it the job of the Merit Systems Protection Board to determine when the executive branch needs to actually follow civil service laws passed by Congress and when it can just ignore them?
It is up to the board to protect those protections that have been brought. And that's what we look at when we're deciding these cases and having them brought before us, is what did Congress give us as far as authority goes? And within that small jurisdiction, whether or not we have the authority to act. And that's really how confined we keep it. It doesn't go outside.
If it's in the law, you don't have the ability to make a decision whether or not it's constitutional.
That's correct.
Because certainly I agree with you. That's the duty of the board to enforce civil service laws as passed by Congress. But I'm troubled by the procedural ruling in March of 26, where the board made the decision that they can determine what law is constitutional or not. You'd agree that the board does not have that authority under our U.S. Constitution, that they get to determine what's constitutional, what's not.
And Senator Peters, which specific case are you referencing?
It is Jackler versus Jarrett v. DOJ.
Yeah, as far as that case goes, it's ongoing pending litigation with the federal circuit, and therefore I can't really comment on that.
Professor Wilson, at the end of his first term in office, President Trump unlawfully took presidential records, including classified information, to his private residence. How will you work to ensure that such violation of the Presidential Records Act, which is a very clear violation, does not occur at the end of his second term, if confirmed?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I'm a rule of law man, and I intend to follow the law, including on the subject of the disposition of federal records, sir.
Thank you.
What made this Peters exchange travel was the structure. Senator Gary Peters of Michigan asked two nominees to the United States Postal Service Board of Governors, a simple yes or no question. Do you support privatizing the mail and package delivery operations of the Postal Service? He asked Lee Brodsky first. He asked Anthony Galeo second. The answers Peters got back were not what a confirmation hearing usually delivers. One nominee said he had no view. The other said he would not privatize. Both answers became part of the record. USPS privatization has been a sustained policy debate for more than 2 decades, intensifying during periods of Postal Service financial strain. Both nominees would have been aware of the question coming into the hearing. The decision by one nominee to say he had no view after extensive policy work in adjacent areas of postal regulation is the structural surprise of the exchange. Peters' follow-up made the absence of a view itself the topic of his questioning. Lee Brodsky's response was that he did not really have a view on whether or not privatizing the Postal Service would make any sense. He said he had heard people talk about it but had not reviewed it as a possibility. Peters' follow-up was direct. Brodsky was being nominated for the Postal Service Board of Governors, a body whose central function is the financial and operational governance of a major federal entity. The privatization question is foundational to that governance. Peters made the point on the record. The nominee had not thought about the central question of the office he was being nominated for. The Board of Governors of the United States Postal Service is established by Title 39 United States Code, Section 202. The board consists of 9 governors appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate. Governors serve staggered 7-year terms. The board sets the strategic direction of the Postal Service, oversees the Postmaster General, and approves the operating plan. A governor who has not thought through the question of whether the underlying enterprise should remain a federal entity is, by the structure of the office, missing one of its foundational policy frames. Anthony Galeo's answer was cleaner. He said he is not for privatizing the post office. He said he thinks it is fixable. Peters pressed for clarity. So you are opposed to privatizing? Galeo confirmed. He said he would not privatize the post office. The answer is now on the record. The position is testable against future board decisions if Galeo is confirmed. The procedural craft of a confirmation hearing is partly about extracting commitments that can be measured later. Peters' 2 follow-up questions to Galeo did exactly that work. The contrast between the 2 nominees' answers will be the headline that travels. One nominee gave a clean position, the other did not. The split provides confirmation reporters with a natural framing for their stories. Postal worker advocacy organizations have already begun calling for one nominee's confirmation and against the others. Industry trade associations have made the inverse case. The Board of Governors composition matters for sector-specific policy outcomes that affect millions of jobs in the largest civilian fleet in the world. Peters then made the substantive case for the question. He said he represents a diverse state that includes many very rural communities. For those communities, the Postal Service is a lifeline. He named vital goods, he named prescriptions, he named all the daily logistics that depend on universal mail delivery at uniform rates. Privatization, in the framing most rural advocates use, would end the universal service obligation that requires the Postal Service to deliver to every address in the country at the same price as urban addresses. Without that obligation, rural service economics collapse. The universal service obligation is codified at Title 39, United States Code, Section 101. The Postal Service shall maintain an efficient system of collection, sortation, and delivery of the mail nationwide. Postal services shall be available to all communities. Effective and regular postal services shall be provided to rural areas, communities, and small towns where post offices are not self-sustaining. The obligation is the structural reason a private mail carrier cannot replicate the Postal Service. A private carrier optimizes for the routes that produce revenue. The universal service obligation requires the Postal Service to run the routes that do not. Galeo named the other reason privatization would be difficult. The financial condition of the Postal Service is dominated by unfunded retiree benefit obligations. The total exceeds $100 billion in present value. Any private acquirer of postal operations would inherit those obligations. No rational private buyer would accept that inheritance without a federal payment for the difference between asset value and liability value. The numbers are so large that any privatization transaction would require enabling legislation that pre-funds the retiree obligations from general revenues. Congress would have to vote on that pre-funding. Bloomberg's analysis of the Postal Service balance sheet is consistent with the figures the Postal Service publishes in its annual report to Congress. The unfunded retiree health benefit obligation is the single largest liability line. The pension obligation is also substantial. Together, they exceed the appraised value of all Postal Service real estate, equipment, and operating systems. The structural implication is that the Postal Service cannot be sold in a private market transaction without congressional appropriations to bridge the gap. That makes privatization a budget question as much as a policy question. The Postal Service Reform Act of 2022 was a bipartisan response to the unfunded liability crisis. The act restructured the way Postal Service retiree health benefits interact with Medicare. The change relieved the Postal Service of roughly $50 billion in projected unfunded obligations. The act passed the Senate 79-19 and the House 342-92. It was signed by President Biden in April 2022. The bipartisan vote is part of the reason any subsequent privatization initiative faces a procedural headwind in both chambers. Public Law 117-108, the Postal Service Reform Act of 2022, is the most recent bipartisan statement from Congress on the future of the Postal Service. The vote tallies are themselves the policy signal. 79 senators voted yes. 342 House members voted yes. The Act's preamble explicitly preserves the Postal Service as a federal entity providing universal mail service. Any subsequent administrative or board-level action that would move toward privatization would have to overcome the legislative posture the Act represents. The Board of Governors does not decide whether the Postal Service is privatized. That decision rests with Congress. The board does decide the operational direction, route consolidation, post office hours and closures, pricing for first-class mail and for the package delivery operations, capital spending on vehicles and sortation equipment, strategic plans for delivery network design. Each of these decisions has implications for whether the Postal Service operates as a public utility with universal service or as a quasi-commercial entity. Governors who do not have a view on the underlying policy frame will still vote on those operational questions. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy's 10-year Delivering for America plan has been reshaping Postal Service operations since 2021. The plan consolidates the mail processing network, slows non-priority delivery, and shifts the cost structure toward the package delivery business. The plan does not require privatization to advance. It does require Board of Governors approval for major capital expenditures and route changes. A governor's policy frame influences how that approval is granted. Even nominees who say they would not privatize will be voting on consolidation steps that critics argue are functionally similar to a partial privatization. The question beneath Peters' yes or no question is whether the nominees will support DeJoy's continued network restructuring. Privatization is a binary policy choice that has to go through Congress. Network restructuring is an incremental administrative process that goes through the Board of Governors. A governor who says he would not privatize the Postal Service might still support significant consolidation that has measurable effects on rural delivery service. Peters' question was the public version. The follow-up questions that will come in subsequent rounds will probe the incremental restructuring posture. Postal worker labor unions have already begun filing public position statements with the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. The National Association of Letter Carriers position cites the nominee's testimony on privatization. The union opposes one nominee and conditionally supports the other. The structured filing of these positions becomes part of the committee record and influences how undecided senators vote. The procedural craft of getting commitments on the record at the hearing pays off in this kind of subsequent filing. What the committee will weigh is whether each nominee's overall record outweighs the answers in this exchange. The substantive case for each nominee includes their experience, their other policy positions, and the support they have within and outside the postal community. The answers in this exchange are also in the record. The committee will hold its vote, the full Senate will hold its vote. Each member will weigh the same record according to their own priorities. Senators who prioritize rural delivery service may vote one way. Senators who prioritize Postal Service financial reform may vote another. The aggregate will reflect the priority ordering. The procedural reason Peters opened with yes or no privatization questions is to build the record before discretionary follow-ups. Yes or no questions, when asked publicly to a confirmation nominee, force the nominee to choose between making a position commitment that can be measured later and giving a non-answer that itself becomes a position. There is no third option. Peters' opening question structure is a common move for senior senators on confirmation panels. It is what produces the headlines that get reported. It is also what produces the commitments that future board votes can be measured against. The hearing transcript will be cited for years. Each nominee's answer is now permanent reference material. If either nominee is confirmed and subsequently supports a privatization or major consolidation initiative, the hearing transcript will be the first document cited against them. If the Board of Governors votes in line with their stated positions, the transcript will be cited as the validation. The procedural craft of building durable reference material is what distinguishes seasoned confirmation hearing senators from those who are simply scoring points for the moment. So the final accountability question is the standard one. What was gained, what was lost, and who is paying the cost? What the public gained is 2 clean position records on the most consequential policy question facing the Postal Service Board of Governors. What was lost was the chance to hear a more developed defense of privatization or a more developed defense of the status quo from either nominee. The cost, if either nominee is confirmed and the Postal Service's universal service obligation is incrementally eroded, will be paid by rural communities and by households that depend on first-class mail. The committee can decide. The full Senate can decide. The public can decide what kind of postal service it wants as status quo from either nominee.